This next presentation is Scientific Advances in Understanding Parental Alienation, Domestic Violence, and Child Abuse. 4 panels. The first one is going to discuss the lack of gender bias in 16 years of judicial decisions regarding abuse and parental alienation. Dr. Lorandos is going to talk again. We have Dr. Christine Giancarlo, who is a senior lecturer at Mount Royal University, and she's a socio-evolutionary anthropologist. She'll be discussing with Brian Ludmer, who is an attorney and often sought out lead or strategic counsel in parental alienation cases, part 1. Part 2 is Abused and Rejected, the link between intimate partner violence and parental alienation. That will be presented by Dr. Gina Rowlands, who's been a social worker for over 25 years. Her research interests include parental alienation, family violence, and trauma. Also, Dr. Richard Warshak. He is one of the world's most respected authorities on divorce, child custody, and the psychology of alienated children. His groundbreaking studies appear in 18 books and more than 90 articles in 18 languages. His book, Divorce, Poison, and his video, Welcome Back, Pluto, are world-renowned classics. The next presentation is there an illusory correlation between the dismissal of abuse allegations and parental alienation? That will be presented by Hessam Varve. I hope I pronounced that properly. He's a graduate student at Colorado State University who's advised by Dr. Jennifer Harman, and their studies are in parental alienation. The 4th presentation is Findings of Abuse in Families Affected by Parental Alienation, and that will be presented by, again, Dr. Lorandos and Amanda Sharples, who is an assistant professor at the University of Toronto, and her research is focused on intergroup relations. I'm assuming when you guys talk, it's going to go 1, 1, 1, and I'll divide the time accordingly unless you tell me otherwise. Come on up, first panel.
Morning, everyone. I'm going to present on behalf of the other 3 authors of our paper. I'm not sure if Brian wants to make some comments as well, and we will go ahead. So as you know, there are recent legislative efforts to control how child custody decisions are handled in family courts, where allegations of abuse and of parental alienation are levied. So specifically, there is concern about how strategic use of abuse allegations may affect custody outcomes in alienation cases. We have heard such comments from, you know who the authors are, of reports saying that, for example, parental alienation is discrediting mothers' claims of abuse, that gender biases are rampant in the courts, and that the abuse allegations are just a means of abusive fathers of evading conviction on abuse counts. So we decided to do a second attempt of some of those accusations that have been made towards our combined research. So we tested 6 pre-registered hypotheses to determine whether there is in fact empirical support for the research findings in quotations, because that's what they are claimed to be by such authors as Meier et al. in 2019 and others. Specifically, that was the one unreviewed study that has identified methodological issues, many of them, but has nonetheless been very influential in the courts and continues to be, especially with the recent reauthorization of the Violence Against Women's Act in 2023. Of note, too, I wanted to mention that nowhere along the line is there any mention that women can be alienated as well. So these claims that the courts are working against women is completely ignoring the fact that alienation is a non-gendered issue. So we looked at 500 trial cases of parental alienation, which were selected from the Canadian trial decisions, and we were selected only those cases in which parental alienation was determined to actually have occurred. So in other words, we didn't mention cases where a judge mentioned the concept, only where it had been determined that it had occurred in the family. And so my graphs here, I'm going to really zip through because they sort of are just, for anyone who's interested, shows the breakdown of the cases. But in the vast majority of cases, the motion was for parenting or modified parenting arrangements, and most of the others were about financial matters that had not been resolved from earlier court appearances. Also of note, we only looked at the most recent court decision in a particular family's case, because there were cases in which parents had been in court many, many times, and so we relied on the most recent judgment. So, custody of children before and after the court decision, we found that out of 322 alienated mothers, 32% of the cases, and 57 of 170 alienated fathers, so that's 33.5, received an increase in parenting time after the court order was made. And so we did find that in about a third of cases where alienated parents go to court, that there actually is some improvement in their parenting access and arrangements. Only a small proportion of alienated parents, 6.5%, actually lost parenting time as a result of going to court. It's still 6.5% that lost parenting time, but it is certainly not a high number. And gender differences were not found. Alienating mothers were more likely to lose their case, and they also were more likely to lose custody, but that only approximated 10% of the variance in the scores. So in other words, 90% of the variance was likely due to other factors, such as severity of the PA, length of separation, time that a child had spent in sole custody of only one parent, and so on. So this is the custody of children before and after a court decision. And so where the mother is the alienator is on your left, and where the father is the alienator is on the right. And we see similar patterns occurring. And so, if a mother is an alienator, yes, there's a chance that she may lose custody. It's quite a small chance. There is also a little bit larger chance the father may gain custody. Both joint and shared custody doesn't change much. Split custody, interestingly, tends to increase after court. So not sure what that's about. Family court outcomes, and again, mother alienating parent and father alienating parent, because there are far more mothers who have sole custody to begin with. Amongst the abuse allegations, we looked at what was the outcome in terms of who's making those allegations and what those are about and how many are there. 52.4% cases did not involve any allegation of abuse at all. And so I think that's interesting, because there have been comments that this is such a common thing to do, to use allegations of abuse against the other parent, usually the alienated parent. And in fact, in most of these cases, there were no abuse allegations. However, there were 768 total allegations that were made against 238 alienated parents, so close to half of our cases. And they averaged 3.2 or so allegations, but in one case or two, there was only one allegation, and the maximum number was 63 allegations made against one alienated parent. The abuse allegations were made by alienating mothers, 459 of them out of 768, by children, and whether the children were coached or not, we did not look at that. We looked at who's making the allegation, the 152, and by alienating fathers, 113. And in some cases, they were extended family members or third parties, so where the alienation had diffused to other people in the child's life. So 462 of the 654 allegations made against alienated parents investigated by third parties were determined to be unsubstantiated or unfounded. For women who charged their ex-partners with alienation, 80% were unsubstantiated or unfounded. And for fathers who charged their ex-partners, that was 73%. And so it averaged at 70.6. Another 2.5 were verified false allegations. And so basically it had to be proven by the court, admissible to the court, that there was absolutely no substance or evidence at all. 1.6% were inconclusive. Sometimes that's because the allegations were still, the investigations were still pending. So overall, 10.9% of the allegations were founded or substantiated, and almost 15% lacked details. So they may have been pending an investigation as well, or a court outcome for an ongoing trial. So this is just to show that in every case, no matter who finds the outcome in the investigation, who does the investigation, the outcomes are about 3/4 of the time unsubstantiated or unfounded. And so this is just showing that overall third-party substantiation, which could be mental health professional of any kind, and civil courts and criminal courts, and where both courts, most of them are unfounded and unsubstantiated. So these numbers are just right away refuting those kinds of claims made by our detractors who are trying to say that parental alienation is all about abuse that is going undetected and unresolved, I guess. So gender and findings of abuse: out of 35 alienated parents found to be abusive, 25 were mothers and 10 were fathers. So even that claim that, the abusers are fathers doesn't hold up in our study of 500 trials, which are rich with information, lots more detail than could be found in the American cases where they were appellate cases. We could actually look at the trial cases thanks to my colleague, Brian Ludmer. And so even where alienated parents were found to be abusive, these were cases where the abuse was a conviction from the past or transitory and no longer considered to be a threat to the children in any way, and in most cases was never a threat to the children. So something like a parent pushing the other parent, and that one parent who was pushed called the police, for example, or someone claiming that a child was disciplined too harshly and it was not considered to be abusive outside of that one incident where, parent realized that they probably shouldn't have spanked the child or something like that. So, and again here, this is just to show that there were only 24 cases where the court disagreed with third-party substantiation. And that's because also our detractors are saying that courts are making these ridiculous claims and they're not listening to the experts who are actually saying that there is abuse happening. Well, we know that, in fact, the third parties are saying the abuse is not happening 3/4 of the time, as are the courts. And also the courts are disagreeing with third parties very rarely. And so the green represents the civil court. That was 11 cases. And the criminal court was the yellow, and that was 9 cases. And the orange is where both courts disagreed with the third-party substantiation. So in a nutshell, here are the highlights. And so this is how we are trying to challenge the report. We don't even call it a study, because the results of the study, the method of the study, that is the unreviewed one that I was speaking of, have never been disseminated. So we were unable to do a direct replication and did a conceptual replication, as I said, for the second time. And again, we found that any of the claims made by Meier et al. And some of our others, did not make sense, and there is nothing to base those on. So a mother found to have alienated her children was not more likely to get a decrease in parenting time. So these are exactly contrary to the claims made by our detractors, and that the so-called abusive parents were mostly mothers. Alienated mothers' claims of abuse against known abusive alienated fathers were not being discredited more often. There was no gender difference there. Alienating mothers were not more likely than chance to lose custody than alienated fathers when a third party such as a GAL, a guardian ad litem, or custody assessor was involved. Alienating fathers made fewer allegations of abuse against alienating mothers, but the percentage of substantiated allegations was similar. So 7.1%, and in mothers, it was close to that. Gender of the alienating parent, number of unsubstantiated allegations of abuse, and an interaction of the variables were not predictors of whether an alienated parent lost custody of their children. And so once again, then our study has shown that, in fact, our detractors have no evidence to back their claims. And so, as Dr. Burnett had said, there is definitely a public relations lack that we need to get on, and because the research is quite clear. Thanks very much. Oh, Brian, did you? Go ahead. Thanks. Sorry.
All right, I'm just going to add a couple of thoughts in terms of use of this research. So firstly, we proceeded on an open science basis. So there's a cohort, there's all these cases. They are rich because of the way we get very lengthy, detailed trial decisions. They're available, firstly, to anybody who wants to challenge our conclusions, unlike Meier's study. And they're available for those of you who want to do future research. There were a surprising number of cases out of Quebec in French that we've translated, so it's a very, very rich data set. Number two, hopefully this study will aid in getting past the rhetoric and the labels that we're fighting against. So to call PA a belief system is to throw out a pejorative before you even get into a discussion. The use of the word abuse, and there's some rhetoric here. The word abuse is the most abused word in the English language. It's vacuous, it is without meaning. Christine points out some of the most important takeaways. Even the legislation says that past conduct is not relevant to future parenting decisions if it is a singular event or it doesn't reflect on the ability to parent in future. So what the detractors are saying is, if you ever did anything in your past that constitutes as abuse, then you're an abuser and we can take the kids from you perpetually, even if it's completely unrelated. What a lot of the cases show is that the allegations of abuse are really just poor parenting, poor choices, things that are fixable in therapy and with education. Christine mentioned split custody. Sometimes a child is too old, but the younger child can be saved, so PA is identified. They'll place the younger child, and there's some very noted Canadian cases about that. And so avoid at all costs these false binaries, because some of the detractors, particularly certain Canadian academics, say it is incompatible to have alienation and domestic violence, for example. So if there's any incident of domestic violence, then you can be victimized in a PA case, and too bad. And again, a false binary. So these are some of the practical takeaways from the research. And again, there's an amazing data set out there for people to use in future research. Thanks.